transmission and infectivity of this virus has changed many aspects in the medical services sector. So let's learn today from this webinar the new paradigm in this special situation. I would invite Dr. Sanjeev Singh to present his views and thoughts on this. Dr. Sanjeev Singh, over to you.
Right, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnan, for that introduction. And it's so great to share the panel with Dr. Vivek Desai. I am a great fan of his and his work across the globe. So I'll get started. The topic was resumption of healthcare services, keeping in view that there are lots of small and big nursing homes and hospitals which are looking forward to restart one post-lockdown. So what I'm going to cover is patient, healthcare worker, clinical management, and some of the processes during this whole period. So there are generally three major questions which are asked. When is the pandemic getting over? Am I audible? And are my slides visible? So these are the three main questions during the pandemic. So as a customary, I'll again ask, am I audible? And are my slides visible to all? So we'll get started. This all pandemic was there in the Spanish flu, which all initiated there. 1/3 of the globe passed away. Spain was the first who basically blew the whistle, and that's why it is called as Spanish flu, though the flu was there everywhere. They practiced social distancing. The schools were closed. They practiced all the immunity boosters. They had masks, and there was high morbidity mortality. And then, as the historian says, that the only thing which we learn from the history that we never learn. And history repeats itself. So David Lloyd George, 1918 Prime Minister of UK, suffered from Spanish flu, was admitted for 2 months. Boris Johnson, the present Prime Minister, suffered from COVID, was admitted for 4 days in ICU, 10 days in the ward. And history repeats, but somehow we were not prepared for pandemic and we didn't learn our lessons pretty well. So some of the positives with respect to, it's not all negative with respect to COVID. There are huge opportunity which is there. India still has the lowest per lakh death rate, and that's close to 30.5, whereas the rest of the globe is at 114. US is at 671 and Germany 583. So that's a big positive. Our recovery rate is also 58 to 60%, and that's another big positive. The crude mortality at 5.5 and case fatality at 2.8 is another one of those data which is positive, and that is where I think we need to look at our demographic dividend, a young population, and a lot of other factors, a better immunity level which would be yielding. So what we need to do before I get started with the resumption of services, what we need to do is wear masks. And everybody, and it is said that if everybody wears masks, then we reduce infection spread by 3% per day. So for healthcare worker, it is N95 and 3-ply surgical mask. For public, it would be any cloth mask. But what is important to have is at least have 3 to 4 cloth masks and rotate its use, because the integrity of the cloth mask gets destroyed if it is wet, and we should not compromise. The second important point is about physical distancing. So there is unlock 1, there is unlock 2, and in the urban area and semi-urban area where the population, square meter population is this much, the infection rate is high. And if it is 909 square meter, the infection is lower. So the density of population is again leading to this high infection rate, and we need to be very vigilant and careful when we go ahead with the unlock times. And the final thing is regarding hand hygiene and disinfection. So right solution is important, because there is a lot of solutions which comes in the market, methanol based. Chlorhexidine and ethyl alcohol is the best solution. So anything which is above 70% alcohol with some bit of moisturizer would definitely be important. Now there are lots of myths with respect to COVID. Now, there is a myth that shoes brings COVID virus. So it's good idea to keep your shoes away when you come back home, but it is not spreading COVID virus. The other is a French study which came in that it is not a virus, it's a bacteria. Completely false. Live virus has been grown, and then vaccines are also being produced from these live viruses. There is this myth that if you keep wearing mask, there is a carbon dioxide intoxication and no oxygen deficiency. And this is complete myth, because there has been for ages, the surgeons have been wearing it for 12 to 14 hours and there is absolutely no problem. So wearing masks does not lead to carbon dioxide intoxication. There is also this understanding that alcohol kills coronavirus. Completely false. There is this thermal scanning is not good enough. Now, if you don't get a calibrated thermal scanner, it is definitely not good enough. But thermal scanning is proven to be very, very effective for measurement of temperature. There is no drug license to treat. Absolutely true, because we are using a repurposed drug which has been there for other. Adding pepper kills virus, absolutely false. Spraying bleach as a bleach chamber, absolutely false. Doesn't have any impact. Exposure to your sun, no impact. Holding breath for 10 seconds proves that you don't have coronavirus. Absolutely false. COVID not present in hot areas. We know we are almost in the midst of summer season. Absolutely no way that the COVID is going away. And ultraviolet kills COVID rays. Absolutely false. So there are so many myths which are traveling across, and the dissemination is so fast amid the social media. What we need to look for is standard protocols, which comes in Ministry of Health and Family Welfare only, or in NCDC, or in ICMR, or mygov.in. So these are the 3-4 websites where you get an updated information and and the recent guidelines, and we need to stick to those information. Now, with respect to patient, I do agree that there needs to be a humaneness in healthcare delivery, and that's very important. So this news item really turned me away when we said that there is this pregnant lady went to 8 hospitals and then she died. So there is definitely anxiety and fear. We should not, as a healthcare professional, we should not judge patients and attendants and say that it is why are you so anxious and why are you so depressed, because that's part of the game, and we need to be compassionate and empathetic. Clear directions from government and management needs to be known to all. And here is this example. Second stage of labor is non-aerosol generating procedure. So any hospital can admit a pregnant woman and deliver, and that is where training and appropriate knowledge is important, and our preparedness is important. So for patients' point of view, we need to be humane in healthcare delivery, and that needs to be respected. Now, coming to healthcare workers, I dedicate my talk to 1,742 healthcare workers who were frontline warriors, and we lost them. And we lost them in their line of duty. And there are 113 doctors in India and 45 nursing staff and paramedics whom we have lost during this pandemic time. Why did we lose them? So a hypothesis is possibly since December, when the first case was brought in, we were caught unawares, or we underestimated pandemic. There were breach in infection control practices. There must have been lack of testing facility, then shortage of PPE, and we treated all ages as equal. And now we say that more than 65, please don't come in. So there must have been some breach in these practices. There is where and that is why healthcare personnel needs to be extremely careful and vigilant. Now, how do we need to do that, and how do we retain and live up to the morale? And Government of India gave an advisory. We need to have a good rota system, encourage self-declaration of symptoms, do a huddle and team meeting. There should not be any layoff, and protect all healthcare workers. And Government of India introduced the concept of buddy system, and that's very, very important. But hospitals also needs to take care whether they are high risk exposure and low risk exposures, provide prophylaxis appropriately, provide PPE which they need to be extremely protective, do an antibody test to understand whether there is an adequate generation of IgM, IgG, watch for their burnout, and keep communicating, because we know that that is a challenge during this time. And this is very true even in laboratory. So all the test which comes in to the laboratory, that all the samples, the vacutainers and other things needs to be uh, uh, sanitized with the hypochlorite solution, and all tests needs to be done at biosafety cabinet. And that is extremely, extremely important, other than the PPE and the physical barriers. So for the healthcare worker, what are the 10 essential checks? And that is where it is extremely important. Do we know our own risk? And if we have heart ailment, if we have diabetes, if we have pulmonary disease, please be watch out for, and don't risk yourself. Be at home, and as much as possible. Do you know from dependence risk level? Because there are many areas where 40% of them, they don't contract COVID from their workplace, but they are contracting it because at either through travel or into their society area. Do you know always that the standard precautions and physical distancing at work is being practiced? Is your workplace safe? The triage guidelines are adhered to? Because if not, please blow the whistle, because you will risk your life. Is testing being done at your workplace? Do your work, is it very well ventilated, or it's a crowded place? So there are these checks which needs to be adhered to and complied with as much as possible. And then CDC has also given an healthcare worker safety guidelines, which shows that at least high risk exposure people needs to be really protected. And they also said that there needs to be there is a virus particle which is generated, which successfully infect a person. So we need to be extremely careful for breath, speaking, cough, and sneeze, and that is why we need to wear mask and maintain physical distancing. Now, are there any success story, or are we just talking about doomsday? So the international success story is New Zealand, which has declared themselves corona free. And how did they do that? Because they had a fantastic quarantine facility. They did superb testing. There was heavy penalty on those who break rules. There was a huge support for the employees. And this prime minister, who had a 2-year-old baby, despite being fantastic mother, was completely available on Facebook for live answering on questions, and there was joint press briefing. Are there any national success stories? So we can adhere to and follow. So Kerala has done the flattening of the curve. Only day before yesterday, again there was a spike, but then public participation, community detection, isolation, treatment, women empowerment, cooperation, intense surveillance is just superb. And this is what we need to do. But the point is how. So this is the route map which one of the district magistrates of Pathanamthitta district drew, and this comes whenever a patient is positive. This is circulated in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website and social media. So this is a route map of an Italian tourist. This is electronic surveillance which is done. He reached to Trivandrum airport, picked up by the taxi, came to the resort, went to the restaurant, had lunch, went to the DJ party. Everything is tracked. And this is how, if a patient turns out positive, or if a healthcare worker turns out positive, this is how contact tracing has to be done. So we are completely aware of primary contacts and completely aware of secondary contact, and we can, according to the guidelines, take care. Now, coming back to symptoms, now there is so much of confusion and so much of anxiety. Now, if for coronavirus you need to have fever plus one more symptoms, and that would be dry cough and shortage of breath. It is almost similar like flu-like symptoms which would be there right now with monsoons, and again with vector-borne diseases like dengue and chikungunya, and maybe allergies. There is loss of smell, loss of taste, which got added as a symptom on 20th June, and CDC has added 1st July running nose, diarrhea, and myalgia. So fever plus any of these symptoms for more than 2 days, you need to get yourself tested, and that would be extremely important. So if you are positive, you fall into 3 categories: mild, moderate, and severe. And it is measured by your pulse oximetry and respiratory rate. And there are only few investigations which we need to do. most of the management is symptomatic. So that is how I think 80%, the health minister has been on record saying 80% of Indian population were asymptomatic, and that's a big, big plus. If you are symptomatic and if you fall under a moderate category or a severe category, you need to look for either a plasma therapy or a steroid therapy, which just got added almost 10 days back. Or in case of severe symptoms, you can have steroids or tocilizumab, and you can also add in remdesivir and favipiravir. Fortunately or unfortunately, favipiravir is only included in management in state of Maharashtra. Though DCGI has given an approval, but ICMR has still not included that as a major treatment. Now, prophylaxis is again very important to protect our healthcare worker. What ICMR has recommended, it should be given for only two categories: healthcare worker and household contacts, which are looking at confirmed cases, and that's it. We see so many prescriptions that it has been given to all and sundry, which is inappropriate. How do I measure from the lab? A neutrophil lymphocyte ratio of more than 3.3 is very diagnostic and confirmatory test for COVID, and that is where we need to be extremely cautious. Now, when I open up my hospital, what do I look for? So my OP, ER, everything needs to function. What we need to do is have a good triage system and a good PPE. So surgical mask in OP is good enough, in AER is good enough, but in IP and isolation COVID, you need to be very, very careful with N95 and eye shield with disinfection. We need to be also cautious with special group, and we'll see how. If the hospital can also start home health, telemedicine and elder care, that would be fantastic because there's a lot of need and requirement. So when we get started, we need to triage ourselves. How do we triage? Because you park your vehicle, you go to the security, you take lifts, better to take staircase, and then if you have symptoms, you come to a particular area, and if you don't, you come to a particular area. So you go to the fever clinic, or else you go and join another group of OPD clinic area where you show to the doctor. So you get yourself tested or visit a fever clinic and innovate yourself of how to protect. And this is a fantastic example. You need to maintain standard distance between the people who are waiting in the waiting lobby, because that is again one of those key. Now, very interestingly, the Board of Governors of Medical Council of India, they came up with a telemedicine guideline, which was soon adopted by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So they say that now you can consult. So WhatsApp consultancy on video, audio, and text is now allowed, and it is legal. So that's a big plus. But it should not be done for surgery and invasive procedure. It should be everybody who gives a consultation should have adhered to a mandatory online course, but that is not immediately within 3 years. We know that this telemedicine is going to be there for many years from now. Avoid any emergency consultation. But what is very, very interesting is, because we know that in India it is just not patient centric hospitals or care, it is also a carer centric care. So now registered medical practitioners can also give this information or your advice to caregivers according to Section 4. Now, what we need to do, what are the core elements? You need to get your identification if you are a doctor, and patient identification done, credentials matched. Your mode of payment should be video, audio, and text. There needs to be an implied consent. Type of consultation is given. You can evaluate as a first consent on follow-up. You can do management with respect to health education, counseling, and medication. And they have classified as OA, A, and B. And chemotherapy and narcotics are under prohibited, which you cannot prescribe. But now you can send your prescription directly to the patient. You can send it to the carer and also to the pharmacy. And you can charge. So, and that's, I think, a big, big plus. So if you are opening up, if we can do telehealth and teleconsultancy and stagger people coming to your OPD, that would be the best. And I think we should go ahead with this. I will not deal with detail because Dr. Vivek is the right person. But what is important in the OPD, air conditioning and air handling are two separate issues. There are already guidelines. I leave for Dr. Vivek to handle. And then it is also important that in our old medical college days, in an isolation ward, an open window and an open door gives 37 air changes, and what we require is 6. So have a good, very well ventilated area in OP, IP, and most of the procedures areas, which would be important. With respect to how do I treat if I get a NCD case in our nursing home and in OP, so the World Health Organization has said be extremely watchful, but nothing changed. So you need to continue with your same medication. There is a lot of belief that the corona spike is similar to ACE2 inhibitor, and ARB and ACE inhibitors needs to be increased in dose, and WHO has come up with this recommendation, not required. Now, coming back to laboratory, what we need to do is take two samples, nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal, and that's important. But when we take, it needs to be transported and in a viral transport medium, and then you need to wear PPE appropriately, and that is extremely, extremely essential. Now, there are 3 types of tests which now ICMR has also recommended. So confirmatory test is a molecular test, and that is RT-PCR. And now at least 1,000 plus labs in the country is already doing it. The other test is an antibody test where we know if the person is infected in past, and it may not be, it is not considered as confirmatory, and ICMR has not included this in the database. So if RT-PCR is positive, that is included in database, and person can be taken as positive, including point of care antigen test, but they have not included antibody as a test which should be included in the database of ICMR. Now, how does it work? If you have a symptom, you have either a pre-symptomatic phase or an asymptomatic phase. So you could be releasing virus even in a pre-symptomatic phase. And then you have symptoms. So that is where masking and so physical distancing is key, because you would be shedding virus. And then symptoms appear and you could be shedding virus post symptoms also. So what happens is you take a nasopharyngeal swab. This is the maximum in the pre-symptomatic and after symptoms have appeared. Your bronchoalveolar lavage, and that is why masking is so very critical. PCR is positive with the live virus, and even with the dead virus, it could be positive, and it is positive during this phase. Now, a lot of people say, why not antibody detection? Now, antibody detection misses a very crucial time of 8 days, and then it becomes positive of IgG and IgM and IgA level. So PCR becomes negative somewhere around 3 weeks. Post that, IgG or IgM or IgA, it still exists. And that is why it is extremely important to maybe club antibody and PCR, but still up till now, PCR remains the most confirmatory test. So what happens with the point of care antigen test? So what ICMR says, do it for all symptomatic influenza cases, asymptomatic cases which has with comorbidities, and also in healthcare setting. And this is important. So it is containment zone healthcare setting, and this is the first time ICMR has come up in a disease setting in hospitals where this test needs to be done. So up till now, there was nothing which was mandatory, but point of care antigen test could be done if the patient is undergoing chemotherapy because they are immunosuppressed, patients diagnosed with malignant disease, transplant, and elderly, and that is it. Nowhere else they are being saying that for every test you need to do a mandatory testing, either RT-PCR or antigen test. Now, it is also important to understand that this for this test, only nasopharyngeal swab is what is written, and the swab needs to be sent to the lab in an hour's time. So what is important from the hospital side is to divide into two areas: non-aerosol generating areas and aerosol generating areas. And these are all areas which generate aerosol, which would be there for 1.5 to 2 hours, but it is should not be confused with airborne infections. And it is important for surgery in respiratory and other tract infections. So if I get an inpatient, should I admit him in isolation room? The answer is no. A good cohort ward is good enough. I am not going to deal with the structure part, but I'm dealing with the process part. If you are admitting a patient in a cohort ward, since I couldn't get a design, I drew it myself. The group of healthcare worker needs to come here. They don PPE, they wash their hands, they come into the ward, which is cohort, but it is very well ventilated and exhaust. But what is the most important step is doffing. So in doffing area should have an exhaust and should have the waste bins and hand wash, and then they need to be there in the shower area. So what is generally missing in the hospital setting is a separate doffing, an exhaust and doffing, and post that a shower area. And that is the key, and that is where we need to pay our attention. Room cleaning, you could, if cleaning is needed prior to 1 hour, you can do a bleach cleaning and a wet cleaning, and that is good enough, and you need not worry. Close room for 1 hour prior to cleaning, and that is good enough. Now, if the patient is getting discharged, the earlier uh, guidelines says that you need to take 2 samples, but that is no longer valid. If you are symptom free for 3 days, you could be discharged home and nothing needs to be done. So no RT-PCR test is required before discharge, and that's a big plus, because a huge publication in US says that repeat testing of RT-PCR is not required. Now let's get into a critical care in what we need to do. Suppress patient cough as much as possible. Reduce suctioning because it's aerosol generation. Use 2 filters because that would be extremely important. And use antivirals like lopinavir and ritonavir has been proven to be completely ineffective. So what you can use is remdesivir and possibly in Maharashtra favipiravir. Now, if you are doffing, it is extremely important. If you remove gowns, wash hands, remove eye shield, wash hands, remove this, everything you need to wash hands. So that is for doffing is extremely important. You can reuse N95 mask by hanging and drying or by hydrogen peroxide vapors, and which is proven and it is completely effective. Now, how do I buy PPE, which is good enough? There is a certification level from DRDO and CITRA, and you can adhere to this and buy only which are valuable products. With respect to special situation, what hospitals have done is to start taking consent at OP and IP and for all procedures. For surgical pathway, which is very important, I'll only deal with the process. I'll not get into engineering. The personnel who needs to, and this comes in from the World Journal of Emergency Surgery and American College of Surgery, the personnel who shifts the patient should be shifting in one go, and he should be wearing PPE, and he is the one who shifts in all location. The route should be fixed and it should be shortest and it should be away from public. The materials which you are using for COVID theater should be all in operation theater. Patient should not go from ward to holding bay to pre-op and then to operation theater. He goes directly into operation theater. In OR, if you are doing an aerosol generating procedure like intubation or extubation or any procedure, the whole team goes out and then comes in after 20 minutes of the procedure being done. And that is the key, and high air changes needs to be followed. The devices which you use are dedicated, and then all surface should be periodically cleaned. Now, this is important because many hospitals have adopted that mandatorily we have to test RT-PCR for all patients who come in, and because there was a Lancet paper which every surgeon keeps quoting that the outcome would be low. Now, American College of Surgeons says we need to do symptom-based screening and not an mandatory testing for all patients. It's not required if the patient can still afford it, and if it is If you think it is important, please go ahead and do it. But as a good guidelines, symptom-based screening is good enough. And then there are some high-risk procedures which are for respiratory rate or emergency procedure where you can mandate testing. For anesthesia, again, you need to have a strict donning and doffing, two filters which is which needs to be used. Coughing and airway manipulation has to be lesser, and don't have one anesthetist managing one case. So there has to be longer shift because lesser people gets exposed, the better it is. For critical care setting, which is important, is respiratory rate, pulse oximetry, QSOFA. But how do I take my decision is based on PF ratio, PCO2 divided by FiO2. If it is greater than 150, it's non-invasive ventilation. And if it is less than 150, it is invasive ventilation in prone position. And that's the position statement which has been published by Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. Now, if for all endoscopy, it is aerosol generating. So it is best to do it in negative pressure and wear appropriate PPE. More than that, I'll not cover. I'll leave it for Dr. Vivek to suggest. Bronchoscopy, again, aerosol generating. If you can avoid for 28 days, it is important, or provide a 7-day isolation. Or if you can batch all bronchoscopy, flexible, rigid, or interventional, it would be good. Nebulization again is a aerosol generating procedure, so be vigilant in those locations. Dialysis. Now we have been doing hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV dialysis for donkey's years. So dialysis, if it is COVID positive, the patient needs to wear mask and that's it. There is absolutely no need to panic. Room dialysis is allowed. Staff needs to be screened and vigilant in those locations. Obs and gynae, as I showed you one newspaper cutting, there is we don't take people who are pregnant. It is extremely difficult to understand why, because forceful exhalation during second stage labor is not aerosol generating procedure. So there is absolutely no risk of taking a pregnant, even if it is a COVID positive patient, to deliver in your hospital. And I think that is what we need to show some compassionate consideration to all these patients who have a lot of faith in the healthcare setting, and standard of care is what we need to follow. So there is absolutely nothing to worry. Now, dental is one of those most critical area because most of the dental procedures, ortho, prosto, pedo, oromaxillo, are aerosol generating procedures, and it would be important to use rubber dams and high volume saliva ejectors to minimize and also have adequate ventilation. But this is one branch of medicine which has been hardest hit. Radiology, absolutely nothing to worry. No air cleaning required, no downtime, though there is a lot of messages which comes from Society of Radiology, but not required. Oncology is one area where you need to be extremely careful because they are daycare chemotherapy. So what is important is if you can do an online consult, switch to oral agents, discuss benefit versus harm, and have prolonged infusion, that would be good enough. I'll end my presentation with support services. So if you are looking after COVID positive patients and you go back home, wash your linen with 60 to 90 degree of water with a good detergent, and that is good enough. There's absolutely nothing to worry. Just in case if you don't have a washing machine, a contact time of hypochlorite solution for 30 minutes is good enough. All waste as per CPCB guidelines goes into yellow except for goggles and face shield, which goes into red, and that's pretty simple, marked as COVID positive waste and disposed separately. Dietary, absolutely no problem. All utensils to be washed with hot water and soap, and we are good to go, and those precautions should be adhered to. My presentation with a fantastic art which has been drawn by a Spanish painter. This painting was done in an honor of all the deceased grandparents of COVID-19 who failed to say goodbye to the grandchildren. And I think this should touch our hearts and do whatever is possible at healthcare facility, whatever we can do to save life and to be compassionate enough. So take home messages: infection prevention with all hand hygiene, physical distancing and masking is important. Health education and safety is essential. Differentiate between aerosol generating and non-aerosol generating. And please take care of yourself. You have been all healthcare workers. We salute you for doing fantastic job, and we are very indebted to your selfless service. Thank you very much. And over to Dr. Vivek Desai.
Dr. Sanjeev Singh, thank you so much for those practical and useful insights that you have shared with us. You talked about some myths and you exposed some of these myths. And what I found very surprising was that ultraviolet light. So I have read a lot of news articles saying that ultraviolet light is very important in hospital setups nowadays. You also talked about a very important human aspect, which is being humane while interacting with others, very important in this challenging times. You talked about the importance of blowing a whistle for any breaches in following SOP, which is very important so that you learn by mistakes and also protect others. You also shared the success story in Kerala. There is one state which has been extremely successful in controlling the infection spread. You emphasized on innovation, how one will think of protecting patients, protecting colleagues in this difficult times. You did touch upon the telehealth medicine, which is very much in vogue, and you did talk about the setup in hospitals, which require more open spaces for betterment of patients. And you did touch about the lab aspects as well, and in the surgical area or in any uh, uh, processes where doffing is required. So the importance of doffing, a requirement of a separate area for doffing and the SOP surrounding it is very important. And we also talked about some process changes in critical care, anesthesia, and surgical processes. Finally, not the least important is about your focus on aerosol generating processes. So I think it is a very important part of protecting both the patients as well as the healthcare workers in the hospital environment, to focus on identifying those processes which are aerosol generating and take care to contain it. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjeev Singh. I would now invite Dr. Desai to present.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krishnan, and thank you also, Sanjeev, for such a lucid explanation. I also learned fair amount of new knowledge from whatever you shared, especially that without AC, also with wet ventilation, it is probably possible to treat patients. So I am going to talk more about infrastructure and then a little bit on economics and finance in how this COVID is going to impact us. So, and I'm going to request Amol to keep changing the slides. So, Amol, next, yeah. So, as you see how Sanjeev began with the first slide, of Spanish flu. Pre-COVID, India was actually a highly technology-driven, healthcare with private sector on the fore. In the forefront, you would generally find only private sector. But unfortunately, we were urban-centric, and in the semi-urban, rural, and smaller towns, the asset quality of the healthcare which exists was not ready to face this pandemic at all. I mean, even today, though from 5,000 ventilators, we have creeped up to 1 lakh in the country and probably growing more, but we don't have those where you would probably now need when the workforce has gone back to where they came from. So we have a problem of what was before the COVID is now not able to fight COVID. During the COVID, where we required mass diagnosis and treatment, we were not ready. Now probably we are, where testing has gone up from 10,000 a day to almost 2.5 lakh, and it still needs to go up, is what we keep hearing. Private sector, which was generally to be at the forefront, was rendered ineffective, because most hospitals, especially the smaller ones, actually closed their doors to patients. Even hospitals which are big ones, face the problem of not being able to take patients as soon as they got positive cases within the hospital. So, in Mumbai, from where I come from, You had Just Log, you had Wokhart, you had, so many Saifi hospitals just shutting doors because they were finding positive patients. So you did not have a private sector at all at the forefront. It was the government, which was left to fend off. The entire treatment, actually, people were struggling. We did not know. I mean, PPE, India never had a PPE. From zero to today, we are becoming net exporters. So that's a good thing, but we were not used to, rendering healthcare something like this. Lack of basic level of technology and skills. So you did not have nurses, you did not have paramedics who were trained to treat a COVID patient. Suddenly, we were finding ourselves that we are not ready. And I think that was probably the reason why India has had the most prolonged lockdown. I mean, that lockdown period was used to train ourselves, to equip ourselves as much as we could. We still will be found wanting, but at least we are better off than what we were when COVID hit us. Post COVID, we will talk about it a little bit detail later, but we need to get prepared for something like this happening. There are already news about bubonic plague coming out of China, that it might again spread. We had a healthcare system. We found that it was not flexible enough. It was not nimble on its feet. We were found wanting, to respond to what was happening around us, and we all remained indoors and try and see how to improve this. Now, of course, we have learned our lessons. We probably will be better prepared in future. And last but not the least, post COVID, we will also have to think how to remain profitable, because healthcare industry has taken a big hit. I will come up with numbers a little later. Next slide, Amol. Now, during the COVID, we have seen three types of facilities. One is for quarantine alone. So, and actually we began with something like that. We were not knowing. So this is for suspected cases, and this needs only a basic infrastructure, just beds, toilets, food and hygiene. You don't need anything else, no negative pressured air or nothing of that sort. So that's for quarantine. And now, whosoever is coming in, state after state have different policies. Some of them keep them in hotels, some of them allow them for even home quarantine, so, or take them to schools or something like that. So that's as far as quarantine goes. For isolation, which is to be done for unknown positive case, will need a negative pressured environment. Okay, so even if you don't have air conditioning, like Sanjeev said, we can have a exhaust of air and create negative pressure in that area, so that whenever door opens, air only gushes in, it doesn't go out. But this will need oxygen. Okay, this will need suction. This will need some basic laboratory. This will need some X-ray facility to find out if we have setting in of pneumonia. Where patient will then probably need to be shifted to the next, stage. And of course, you will need the other support services which are there. Garbage disposal. Many could not actually find how to dispose the PPE because the quantum was high and we don't know how to dispose that. So that was also a problem. Now coming to critical care, which is where we were found lacking. So apart from the oxygen bit of it, you would need ventilatory support. Okay, so we probably ramped up ventilator production and we got things in place, but unfortunately we still do not have enough respiratory technicians to operate that ventilator. We do not have intensivists trained enough to work in these areas. So I'm really a little scared that how we will face this when we move into the tier 2 and tier 3 towns. I just saw a video by Dr. George Chandy, the ex-director of CMC, where he says that probably the peak will hit us around October, November. So we still are way off, and we have not faced what probably lies in store with us. Apart from that, in critical care, you will need stat labs, you will need mobile X-rays, monitoring systems, and all of that. And more importantly, you probably are going to need housing facilities for the staff who's working there, because it's not very easy for these people to keep and traveling back and forth. They are not welcome to where they are staying because they are working in critical care where you have positive patients. So if possible, we will need housing provision besides wherever we are rendering this critical care. bronchoscopy and a procedure room also, attached to this will be useful because it's a lung disease. Next slide. Now, what are some of the post-COVID infrastructure changes, that we anticipate? I mean, I come from Bombay. Yesterday, I was having some call with a potential client, and he started off only by saying, "So why are you saying we need 700 square feet per bed? Where people are telling us that we can do an NABH accredited hospital in 400 square feet per bed." If that's the kind of thing, we are in for trouble. Hospitals which are old, are finding already difficult how to accommodate waiting areas. You don't have waiting areas. Corridors are cramped. You can't even wait in corridors. So all those kind of things are now going to probably change. So overall, you might see an increase on a per bed area, which creep up to maybe 800, 900, or even 1,000 square feet a bed. Okay, so that's one major change that will happen. People have understood, that you need to change rapidly. So for that, a structural grid, and I will show in the next slide what a grid means, will be more important, so that you work with a grid of 8 meter or 8.5 meter or even 9 meters. You will find yourself to be more flexible when you are converting, big halls into COVID wards, or, dining areas into COVID wards, or cafeterias into COVID wards. It will be that much more easier to do that kind of a change. You will need an emphasis on pre-engineered building. What you are seeing now, ITBP making a 10,000 bed facility in 1 month flat, or many places have been done very fast, but these have been done fast using pre-engineered building systems. Okay, now you have to see that how much robustness this has. I'm sure that it will, but this is now the era where you will need to bring those in. Convertible air conditioning systems, I'm going to talk a bit more later. You'll need seamless floorings, so that you cut down as much as possible in terms of infections. Technology use, you will see manifold increase. So from a low touch or no touch, kind of a system. So you now have doors which you can open by feet. You have partition consulting rooms. The sample collection is also only hand coming out, as you see in multiplexes. How you have the ticketing system. So those kinds of things are going to come in, and they're going to stay. You will have a lot of robo delivered hospitality. So your meals tomorrow will probably not be brought by a class 4 attendant, but it will be served to you through a robo. Pneumatic chutes will become more and more popular because it's a no touch, low touch kind of a thing. So wherever you have a low touch or no touch, these kind of things are going to come up now. Hands-free wash basins, urinals, toilet seats, all of those will be there. Sanitizable walls, doors, and floors. If you are doing that, then your tapestry that you will use, so sofas will probably not be there. You will have Rexine kind of a thing, which can be cleaned, which can be sanitized, with liquid. Germicidal coatings are now coming in because these are found to be coronavirus. You can resist coronavirus with that. So this, and the shelf life of that, once you put it on, say, door handles of toilets, rooms, taps, you have lift buttons, things like that, their shelf life is 1 year, and they are giving you quarterly, reports of whether this is still working or not working. So these coatings are now available. Low use of curtains, I've already said. Oxygen supply ability to every nook and corner, because we've found that oxygen has been the savior in this pandemic, and wherever you can, you will need to see you can reach oxygen supply lines. Mobile hospital modules will become popular because we've certainly found that Indian Railways converting almost 20,000 or even more, I think 50,000 coaches, 50,000 beds through this kind of a mechanism. We used it in Delhi as well. So it is like you going to the patient rather than patient coming to you. That's the kind of strategy that the government used. It will be useful, and we will probably need more and more of these. Indian Army has shown that they can build hospitals in 1 week flat using tented premises which are there. Zydus actually in Ahmedabad started the concept of taking a porta cabin, and you can use it for an outpatient. You don't take the positive patient inside your hospital. So one of the problems that has happened in past was, especially in Italy, that you had COVID and non-COVID patient in the same building, without proper segregation. So if you do that, you are playing with fire. That is how most of the hospitals in India also started closing down, because you had a mixture of both. You didn't know how to deal with these two different types of patients. So if you do something like that, you have within your campus create a porta cabin based or any other way of tented kind of an accommodation for these kinds of patients. Treat your outpatients also like that. You will probably end up not having COVID inside. uh, if you have a hospital which has wings, that is the best, where you can segregate very easily. This is COVID area and that is non-COVID area. A thermograph is becoming now a little bit more popular. I have had some companies talking to us very seriously in terms of how they can, instead of taking a digital thermometer every time and putting it on the forehead, this is a thermograph which tracks you as you enter and it immediately beeps if your temperature is high. It also keeps a record, and you can do a contact tracing, using something like that. It will also show you if people are wearing their masks or not. So you can identify that using a thermograph. Next slide, Amol. Now, this is the grid system which I was trying to tell you. So this grid is what the 4 columns that you see in the dark gray is a grid, and this should be about 8 to 9 meters. And you will find that most of your departments will start fitting in if you follow this kind of a grid. Next slide. Now this is a typical isolation room. So you have a vestibule with anteroom, a separate toilet, and then you have the room. If you can make something like this, this will be most easy to handle a positive case. So we've done a design in Abu Dhabi and Dubai because they wanted a hospital like that. So this was a module which we repeated. Next slide. Even intensive care, you could have something where you have a nurse sitting just outside the cubicle. Okay, we had done this in Asian Art Institute in Mumbai, and we found it to be extremely effective, for closed door nursing. And there's also a door so that it helps you in the air circulation bit of it. Next slide, Amol. Yeah, you can skip this because this is just the intensive care unit again shown. Now coming to the crux of the matter of air conditioning, which Sanjeev was saying, and this is probably because the way we used to supply air is very different than what a COVID center required. The problem with this virus is it doesn't have air transmission, but it needs a droplet of water. So when you cough, there is a droplet, it will stick to it, and that's how it affects you. So the thing is that there is a design guideline which is given by ISHRE and National Center for Disease Control. For ICUs and HDUs, you need a temperature of 26 to 28 degrees. You need to maintain relative humidity. This is important. You need to maintain relative humidity less than 60%. And you need to have a minimum 5 Pascal negative pressure as compared to the adjacent area. So this is a key to maintain, the air pressure. Now coming to the air that you will supply, it will have to be only a once through type of treated fresh air supply. Okay, so you're not going to recirculate the air. Normally in air conditioning systems that we use in hospitals, we recirculate almost about 75% of the air. But in COVID wards, you're not going to do this. You need to supply it once, and it will then be exhausted out. And when you are supplying it, there is a 3-stage filtration. Okay, you will have a pre-filter 10 microns, fine filter of 5 microns, and then the HEPA of 0.3 microns. Plus, you will add a UVGI, light, which is ultraviolet germicidal irradiation light on the cooling coil. Once you do that, you can rest assured that the air which is entering your ICU unit or this critical care unit will be COVID free. Now at the exhaust side, it is important that you put a filter again, and that filter better be HEPA, because you do not want this organism to go out through your exhaust into the environment and infect someone else. This is extremely different than what we are used to do that. So 110 to 120% of fresh air with HEPA at the exhaust outlet, again with UVGI, so that it to arrest any solid media so that COVID-19 is not, exposed out. ACPH to be not less than 12. You heard Sanjeev saying that with open doors and windows, you can have almost 37 air changes. So you need to maintain at least 12 air changes minimum, for good ventilation. Important again, exhaust side HEPA filter will need not to be cleaned, but it will need to be burnt. The once life is over, you just have to burn it. Otherwise, you can clean HEPA filters every 6 months. But on the exhaust side HEPA filter, you have to burn it, and when you burn it, you have to wear a PPE kit. Segregation of COVID and non-COVID to be strict, with different systems of air conditioning as explained. Next slide. Now coming a little bit to the financial impact. Now we have International Monetary Fund, which is predicted about 3% contraction in the global GDP itself. And India will suffer maybe more because we prolong the lockdown more than any other country. So we are going to see a more severe contraction in our GDP. Indian private healthcare, staring at potential operating loss of almost about 20,000 crore in the first quarter itself. Second quarter doesn't seem to be rosier either. So you are looking at a fairly high operating loss in hospital sector, healthcare sector. Revenues of hospitals, diagnostic centers down by 60 to 70%. Hospital occupancies plummeted to almost 20 to 30% with fixed costs of salary remaining same. So this was a big problem and how to handle. Additional costs of keeping patients and staff safe compounded with problems of capping of pricing. So at the other hand, you had to use masks, PPEs and other things, and at the same time your pricing was capped by the government. Pharma business took a hit because most of the APIs were imported from China, and now we have a ban from China for imports, and to add to it, exports were difficult. So it's not like though the drug need was high, but pharma businesses also took a hit. Biomedical industry affected, sales going southwards. Standalone centers found it extremely difficult to sustain, with low income, and my fear is that less than 50 beds, you will see a lot of hospitals, closing down. Projects which started in the last 5 years, had a double whammy of not only the low income but also interest burden, where moratorium was over and you were not only paying the interest but also part of the principal. So these are the projects which we'll see, how they are going to handle it. Next slide. Now, what will be some macro level changes that you probably will anticipate? I think, emphasis might shift to sufficient public health facilities. So with, this Ayushman Bharat kind of scheme and statewide insurance schemes, government took a standing as a payer more than a provider, and suddenly they found that when COVID happened, private sector was not there. So it was completely public health infrastructure on which they had to depend. So you will see a shift on the private, on the public sector. We are already seeing state governments approaching with large hospitals to be built in their respective, constituencies. A government may also have a transient phenomena with more robust kind of a process that they may take over private sector beds, through a pandemic act, which they have done. They have not done a very good job out of it, but this is something that they will think about. Regional disparity will need to be removed. States where healthcare is down, where GDP to spend on healthcare is low, will suddenly see higher spend on. So you may focus more on those kind of states. There will be more funding, in public sector. I'm quite sure about it. Training of paramedics, and intensivists will need to go up many folds, and it is extremely difficult to get people who can work in this kind of a situation. Make in India emphasis will go up, to reduce heavy reliance on imports when you were not even able to import, and we had to build capacity, and it is quite creditable, for the government and the industry to have come from where zero to where we are today, in terms of certain things like PPE kits and reagents and things like that. Technology will drive healthcare like never before. I mean, you can see it, and there are webinars after webinars on telemedicine. So you will see a major shift in healthcare, the way we deal with, with patients. Next. Now, what will be your financial strategy? And I think this is my last slide, if I'm not wrong. Emphasis on cost cutting, like never before. So you will have to find, from where can you cut costs, every possible front. Doctors' compensation models may shift to fee for service, from a fixed salary kind of a thing. And I was talking to Sanjeev yesterday, and they also felt, despite a not-for-profit kind of operation, they were finding it difficult how to sustain doctors, because in hospitals, 50% of your, not 50%, maybe 40 to 50% of your expenses is towards salaries and wages, and doctors is about 20 to 25%. So this is going to take a hit. There will be renegotiation with doctors, the way their compensation models are. Leveraging technology wherever feasible and affordable. Telemedicine will play a very big role in this. Pharma industry will also, have this, whatever we had, those online pharmas will flourish. Negotiation will have to be done for loan repayments. MSME, healthcare is coming to MSME sector. So this is a little bit, required, that how do you renegotiate your loan repayments in such a situation. Increase in credit cycle time. Hospitals will need to, negotiate their terms in terms of payments. Postponement of growth capex. So we had some good projects, which we wanted participation in terms of strategic investments, or even a buyout or a sale. But most chains that we dealt with have said that, doctor, we cannot afford, to spend. So I think this entire year we may not see heavy capex funding, by hospital chains into building new capacities, because they will be struggling. In long-term financial strategy, hospital design standards will get stricter, capex will go up, thereby probably reducing the bed size complement of hospitals. So you may not see too many 200, 300 bedders, but maybe more of 100, 150 bed hospitals coming up, because you're going to have 800, 900 or 1000 square feet per bed. So capex is, is going to be an issue. People will want to be less dependent on debt. That might be a good thing, because that will open up more equity avenues, for investments, for private equity funds. Rationalization of human resource utilization. So we have had over the years, growing of staff to bed ratio from 3.5 when I started consulting, to now about 6 per bed, or 6.5, or even 7 per bed. So I think hospitals are going to now rethink. Maybe multitasking will come in, and we'll have to see how to, resource rationalize. Aggregator models of supply chain to cut costs. I think companies like Medica Bazaar must have done extremely well, in this kind of a thing, where we needed aggregators, to not only cut costs, but also be able to provide you with speed. High usage of technology, I've already spoken about it. Diversification in allied businesses, So if you look at hospitals like maybe chains like Apollo or Aster, you will see that, their cash flows are coming more from their pharmacy chains, So I think more and more of these pharmacy chains and diagnostic laboratory chains, probably you will see. Home healthcare, probably, you will see in future. Mergers and acquisitions probably will happen more, because you will need a scale. Unless you have economies of scale, it is difficult to survive, such kind of an onslaught, where you have your income streams are lower and your costs are fixed. So if you have economies of scale, you will probably, do better in future. So I think this is probably the end. Amol, is there any more slides? I think this is done. Open for questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Desai, for a very lucid presentation on the infrastructure and the financial aspects of healthcare today. If you allow me to summarize just a few minutes, you started with the 3 types of facilities that require infrastructure changes, which is the quarantine facility, isolation facility, and the critical care. And one thing you highlighted the important aspect of there is a shortage of trained personnel, especially the paramedical. So we need to resolve that. And you also mentioned about because of social distancing, there's a big challenge in space requirements in hospitals. You also touched upon the important aspects about oxygen supply ability of hospitals, very important. The interesting thing is about coming up of mobile hospital modules. You also talked about contact tracing and monitoring visitors by using thermographs, which was very good. And the most important part in the inpatients is the air conditioning. So you detailed the nitty-gritties of air conditioning. On the financial side, you did mention about the cost associated with safety, because safety is most important. And you also mentioned a bit about challenges to the small hospitals, especially hospitals with less than 50 beds. You did see into the future. You said things to come would be now government is more involved in payment and providing services, but probably it will change to a public-private partnership kind of a scenario. And you did mention about the short-term and long-term aspects of financial in this era. Now we have quite a few questions. Shall we take up those questions?
Sure.
Okay. So maybe since you are there, Dr. Desai, first thing is about how to resolve the shortage of trained hospital personnel. Would it require exchanging people from one hospital to another, from one state to another? What is your thought on that?
No, so I mean, India needs more number of doctors, double the number of doctors and triple the number of nurses. You know, we knew this before also, but I think we can do some short-term training, programs. So I think, so we joined hands with McKinsey. They have a called Generation. So because now training also, education is also become digital. So it was a 4-hour training module for paramedics, to get trained in how to deal with COVID treatment. And like Dr. Sanjeev said, even that doffing and donning and the, how you undress is equally important, with the hand hygiene that you have. So these kinds of training programs, if you can do, probably digital, teaching can be a fast way to train more and more people. That is what comes to my mind. But importantly, things like intensivists, respiratory technicians, we have a short supply. We don't, even if you have a ventilator, you should know how to use the ventilator. When to prone the patient, how much should be the airflow, all of that, those are technical things, which probably India lacks. I think Sanjeev can talk more about it because, at Amrita, they do both. They treat as well as they train. So, Sanjeev, can you take that?
Yeah, I think it is man behind the machine, which is very important. We are concentrating lot on PPE numbers, quantity, as well as making ventilators. But we are not. Government has still not spoken about the man behind the machine. And until unless you have these trained personnel, because ventilator in non-invasive may not be too much, but invasive ventilation is a science, and the doctor, the respiratory therapist, and the nursing needs to be trained. So I think the professional societies need to be. We cannot be always dependent on government because they are doing their bit. The professional societies have to really pull up their socks, like anesthesia group and the surgeons and respiratory medicine, and they need to devise some short-term simulation-based curriculums for faster training.
Okay. Dr. Sanjay Singh, since you are on the video, the next question is addressed to you. You did mention about the lab test, the PCR and the total antibody kits that are available, and you did mention that the total antibody kit can support or improve the diagnosis along with PCR. So the question is, there are 2 kits marketed by companies for antibody testing, the total antibody test, which detects IgA, IgM, and IgG, which can be used for diagnosis along with PCR to improve detection rate. While ICMR has issued guidance on the use of IgG kits for surveillance, there is no mention or guidance so far that has come on the use of the total antibody kit. Can you throw some light on this, and when it is likely that they will come out with some guidelines on the use of total antibody kits, Doctor?
So I think, to be fair to ICMR, they have been extremely dynamic and they have issued guidelines on time. Except for, my personal opinion is, except for hydroxychloroquine, all guidelines have been perfect. They still have considered RT-PCR as the confirmatory, and they introduced point of care now for antigen. Antibody, it is IgG up till now, though there is a strong feeling about IgM and IgA as well. But I think one, mixing RT-PCR along with antibody is been a strong consideration. There is a lot of science and a lot of data which is already there, which has been now considered by ICMR. And just doing antibody, they have included it for surveillance, not for diagnosis, and which is very relevant because RT-PCR is still the gold standard. A lot of people have suggested doing a CT chest, but unfortunately they have not measured CT chest with a confirmatory test, which is RT-PCR. So it is again a very small sample size. So more science, more evidence needs to be generated for ICMR to adopt. But I think they have done a phenomenal work. There needs to be more hospitals who needs to participate.
Since you are closely associated with ICMR, we would like to know what is the status of the consideration for guidance on total antibody kits from the ICMR?
So I won't be able to speak from their behalf, but I think there is a lot of work which is being done, and they're looking at strong evidence. So I think up till now, RT-PCR, TrueNet, CBNet, point of care is all done, and even antibody IgG kit is all done. But as a wholesome antibody kit, I think there is a strong evidence which is being built, and I believe in another time to come, they will soon introduce this as one of those diagnostic aid.
Okay. The next question is also about the laboratory aspect, the IgG kits. So while ICMR has given out the guidelines for using IgG kits for surveillance, most of the kits in the market, their specificity is not up to 100%. It is lower than 100%. So what is the impact of the test done with an IgG kit, which is less than 100% specific, when a person is checked for immune status? What will be the impact to the society?
So, yeah, it is very true because the specificity is low, and so is it for point of care antigen tests. But I think it is that is why ICMR has recommended this only for vulnerable population. It is not recommended for everybody. It is recommended for elderlies, comorbidities, vulnerable healthcare providers, and wherever it has been done, people have found it extremely reliable to be able to understand and advise the healthcare workers to come back. And till IgG, till 35 days, have been giving a phenomenal result. So, though we do admit that since specificity is low, but wherever they have been tested, there are a lot of institutions who have been performing on their healthcare workers, and they have found it very relevant, and the healthcare workers have come back to work on time.
Okay. The next question is to both of you. Feel free, whoever is able to answer this, or both of you can answer. How to conduct general OPD consultations and basic health checkup in the new scenario? And what are the primary precautions to take when admitting a patient in hospital till the time the PCR report is received?
So I think I will not take the latter part of it. That probably Sanjeev will be better off. But I think in terms of OPD consultations, I can see that there will be. See, earlier, that Indian psyche was doctor को नहीं मिलेंगे तो how will it be? Like face to face, you need to be with him. But I think that is now taking a rapid change. People are more than willing, actually more happy now to do a teleconsult rather than go and visit a hospital. Even if you tell someone कि साहब आप डॉक्टर के पास चले जाइए, they say no, is it possible to do a teleconsultation or a so I think that's a good thing. And Sanjeev said also that if you can, that also helps you to stagger your patient load. It helps you, also the doctor, it helps both the patient and doctor to time themselves as per whatever is the required, so doctors can work late in night also, but they can time themselves. So it's not like, you have to be in a hospital for so long. So I think that outpatient, business models are going to change for good. I mean, I don't see that this will go away. This will remain. And that's what I feel. Regarding what precautions to be taken, I think Sanjeev probably can answer that better than I can.
Yeah.
One more thing regarding OPD consultation, I think as much as we can go telehealth, that would be best. And that is key for OP. So gone are the days where you see 150 patients waiting outside to see a doctor in an OPD, both in a nursing home, single clinic, and otherwise. With respect to IP, how long, what are we going to do till his tests come positive? Until last week, when this point of care antigen test came in and where government has recommended it for surgical procedures, till that time, neither WHO nor CDC nor ICMR has recommended mandatory RT-PCR testing. It is these professional societies who have issued their own guidelines and say, and because of their fear and anxiety, which we should respect, they are testing them. Now, with the sensitivity of 89% and RT-PCR is not equivalent to infectivity. So a dead virus could also give an RT-PCR positive. So I think we need to change that phenomena and culture in our working, that we need to follow universal precautions, standard precautions until proven otherwise. Every patient is COVID, and adhere to most of the infection prevention practices.
Okay. The next question is around discharging a patient. So, what are the key factors to consider before discharging a patient, especially the test to be done? Nowadays, I think they have changed the guideline that PCR test need not be done. But would an antibody test would help, like total or an IgG kit, for example, while discharging a COVID patient after recovery?
So that's a good point. So ICMR had looked at studies in Spain and in US where they found out that unnecessarily testing twice 24 hours apart is not helping. Most of the patients were symptom free, and that's why they revised their discharge policy that they all can go home provided they are symptom free for 3 days. So for mild and moderate. So that has been, I think, dynamically taken. Now, the IgG comes positive from the 9th day. So I'm not sure whether what level of IgG we can recommend, which would be good enough for them to say that yes, they can also be discharged. So 3 days symptom free is a very cost effective way of sending a patient home, and the science backs it. If there is more diagnostic ability which is available for IgG, then definitely it will be incorporated. Up till now, there is no evidence.
Okay, there's a follow-up question on this, which is about the hospital healthcare workers. How often should a hospital test its healthcare workers? And can an antibody test be frontline, and those who are negative can be tested with PCR? What are your impressions?
So how often? I think earlier it was 5th day and 10th day, but it is basically not required. We should encourage or create an environment where they should self-declare their symptoms. We also know that there are we spread virus in pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic condition. So I think we need to be extremely watchful during that time, because just having an antibody testing IgG kit may not help. So One is that, and second is we are too restrictive ourselves to healthcare facility. But these healthcare workers go back home in a bus or in any other transport mechanism where they need to follow social distancing, where they did not. Back when they go back to the hostel, again they need to adhere to some precautions where they did not, and that is how two cases became 54 and hospitals starts closing down and government started closing down. So they need to follow at all levels, and self declaration of symptoms and not laying down any penalty, then only the culture will come in that they say that they have symptoms and they need not come.
Right. So, doctor, you just mentioned that for the antibody kits, especially the IgG kit, the result, we don't know what is the protective level of the antibody that is depicted in the result. So I guess that is done by some special centers. So can you throw some light on those centers, which I think it is they are doing the neutralization test to correlate the antibody level with the protectiveness of the test result. Which are the centers doing this neutralization test, doctor?
Which are the centers in the country?
Yes.
Oh, I will have to come back on this. I don't know immediately, so I will have to come back on this.
Okay. There is one question around taking care of dialysis patients. So if you can throw some light on the protocol for a dialysis patient or for other regular patients coming for daycare to a non-COVID facility but tests COVID positive later.
So unfortunately, just like pregnant ladies, dialysis patients also have been running from pillar to post. Now we have been isolating them for hepatitis positive patients, Hep B, Hep C, and HIV, and have been dialyzing them in a separate location. And that is good enough because they come for 3 to 4 hours of hemodialysis. If they are, even if they are positive, they need the virus can enter from 5 areas: two eyes, two nostril, and one mouth, and virus can exit from two nostril and one mouth. And if we can have mask then during this dialysis period we are good enough. So, and if we can do the contact disinfection of their chairs and wherever they touch common surfaces, I think that is good enough. So even a COVID positive patient should be dialyzed. We should be humane, we should be empathetic, and we should really take care of them at every level.
Okay. Next question is to Dr. Desai. This is about the, you detailed about the important aspects of setting up a facility, whether it's outside or in the open or within the hospital. Are there any standard guidelines so that, you know, every hospital which is being set up follow the certain standard SOP for setting up a facility for COVID, treating COVID patients?
Yeah, I think they are available off the web also. You know, there are government mandates which are there. So the important thing for anyone to understand is whether you are building a temporary facility or you are going to build a permanent, because then the planning will differ, you know, between the two. So temporary will have to be as cost effective as possible, because one will not like to spend too much money if you are building a temporary setup. Whereas for permanent, you know, guidelines are for air condition and air quality, indoor air quality guidelines have changed quite a bit. Those have to be strictly followed. Otherwise, you know, you may have problems. So even existing hospitals, you know, people have gone and changed their air conditioning system to ensure that patient rooms have become negative isolation. But otherwise, for infrastructure, there are guidelines by the ministry which are very straightforward, you know, in terms of what you need to do, which will cover everything. It will cover the area, the spaces, how to treat your water, you know, electricity, medical gas, everything, how to dispose your garbage. All are quite well detailed out. You need not, you know, go here and there. Just go to the website and they will tell you. State-wise, there might be some tweaking of those guidelines, but more or less all of them are similar.
Okay, thank you, doctor, for that. There is one question which is reflecting, but I'm not able to read it. So I pass it on to Amol to read that question and do the needful. Amol?
Yeah, Dr. Krishnan, which question?
I'm not able to see that question. I'm not able to see that. So
It is a question by, it's a question by Krishna Shukla. Any help by net ratio?
okay.
I don't understand this question. Any help by net ratio?
Which ratio?
Neutralizing, any help in deciding NEUT, neutralizing oblique lymphocyte ratio?
न्यूट्रोफिल लिम्फोसाइट संजीव, ये तुम्हारा क्वेश्चन है भाई.
Yeah, it is proven to be a better diagnostic aid. Neutrophil lymphocyte ratio greater than 3.3 is considered to be much more confirmatory as a lab test.
okay. Any other questions there on the board, Amol? Otherwise, you can proceed to closing.
No, that's all, Dr. K. All the questions are done.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Desai and Dr. Sanjeev Singh, for sharing your valuable time and enlightening the delegates on the importance of changes in the current scenario. Thank you so much, and over to Amol for closing.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan, and thank you, Dr. Sanjeev Singh and Dr. Vivek Desai, for your very lucid presentation and patience for handling all the questions. And thank you also for the attendees who have spared their valuable time for our Orthos COVID-19 webinar series. And we'll come back again next week with another interesting topic. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, team.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan and Anmol. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek.
Thank you.